Chapter 1. The Apprentice. You are 16 years old. Your grandfather runs a tiny clinic in a county town few people outside the province could find on a map. You arrive with one suitcase, 2 shirts, and the confidence of someone who has never treated a patient. You expect acupuncture needles, secret formulas, and maybe even a few impossible recoveries. Instead, your grandfather hands you a broom. Before sunrise, you sweep the floor, boil water, and open the wooden shutters. Then you grind herbs in a stone mortar until the skin on your palms begins to split. You memorize the names of 361 acupuncture points before anyone allows you to hold the needle, and you recite passages from the Yellow Emperor's Inner Classic long before you understand what they mean. Your grandfather never explains anything twice. When he finally lets you place 3 fingers on a patient's wrist, he stands beside you and watches. You adjust the pressure. He says nothing. You move your fingers slightly, and still nothing. In this clinic, silence usually means you miss something, so you try again. For 3 years, most of your education is observation. You are not allowed to speak during a consultation unless someone asks you a question, and you are not allowed to touch a patient without permission. You sort astragalus, angelica, licorice root, and dried ginger into wooden drawers, learning every herb by smell, color, weight, texture, and the way it breaks. Once a month, a truck arrives carrying sacks of raw ingredients from wholesale markets 3 counties away. Your grandfather inspects every sack himself, rejecting nearly 1/3 of the shipment. Some roots were harvested too early, some were dried too quickly, some are weak substitutes, and others are simply fake. He tells you that a doctor who cannot recognize a false ingredient should not be trusted with a real patient. You earn no salary. You sleep in the back room and receive 2 meals a day, while your parents send you $30 a month for everything else. Your old classmates are earning wages in city factories, sending money home and buying motorbikes. You are still sitting beneath a flickering light, sorting bitter roots into labeled drawers. Some nights, you wonder whether you chose the wrong life. Then an older woman arrives with recurring stomach pain. Several hospitals have ruled out urgent conditions, but no clear cause has been found. Your grandfather examines her quietly, taking her pulse for 4 minutes before writing a formula containing 9 herbs. 2 weeks later, she returns and says the pain has eased. She praises him as if he performed a miracle, but he does not accept the compliment. Instead, he asks what she changed, what she ate, whether the pain moved or simply became weaker. Then he tells you to record every detail. You still do not understand the case, but you begin to understand the rule. Never let a good result make you stop asking questions. A man in his 50s also visits every week with a cough that has lasted 3 years. His hospital tests have not revealed an obvious cause. Your grandfather adjusts the formula slightly after every visit, never explaining the changes out loud. Over 4 months, the man reports that the cough gradually becomes less frequent. When you ask your grandfather how he knew what to change, he tells you that one day you will understand. But first, you must take 10,000 pulses and get at least 1,000 of them wrong. That night, you do the math. At your current practice rate, which is almost 0, 10,000 feels impossibly far away. That is the first real lesson. Before medicine tests your knowledge, it tests whether you can stay. Chapter 2. The year you almost left. You are 24 now. You spent 4 years at a university of Chinese medicine, then 3 more years in standardized residency training at a city hospital you never wanted to work in. You took the national licensing examination twice. The first time, you failed by 6 points. You do not talk about that year. The second time, you passed. Your certificate has your photograph, license number, and a red government stamp. You frame it, then place it inside a drawer because you cannot afford an office worth hanging it in. You are officially a resident physician, which sounds important. It is also the lowest position in the department. Your salary is about $710 a month before deductions. After paying rent for a shared apartment, you have roughly $240 left. You work 6 days a week. During a single morning clinic, you may see 40 to 60 patients. Each person receives about 4 minutes, 3 fingers on the wrist, a look at the tongue, a few questions, and then a prescription containing 12 to 15 herbs before the next file lands on your desk. There is always a line outside the door. Some patients have traveled 6 hours by train because a hospital badge feels safer than a village clinic sign. By the time they leave, you know their pulse pattern, tongue coding, and diagnosis, but by the next morning, you often cannot remember their names. There are too many names. Your attending physician reviews every prescription, crossing out ingredients and replacing them without enough time to explain. Sometimes you understand the correction, and sometimes you copy it into a notebook and hope understanding arrives later. Your grandfather calls once a week. He asks whether you still take careful pulses, or whether you have started rushing like the city doctors. You tell him you are still careful, but the truth is more complicated. The hospital measures patient volume, waiting time, and prescription value. It cannot easily measure whether you understood the person sitting in front of you. You begin to realize that efficiency and care are not the same thing. Under pressure, one usually defeats the other. At month 9, a patient's family corners you in the hallway. They are angry about a diagnosis you did not make and an outcome you could not have prevented. You stand there in a white coat that suddenly feels like a costume. Later, your attending finds you sitting alone in the stairwell. He does not give you a motivational speech. He simply sits beside you until your breathing slows. Then he says, "The doctors who stay are not the ones who feel nothing. They are the ones who feel the weight and still return the next morning." You are now at month 14. A senior nurse tells you that residents who survive the first 2 years usually stay, while the ones who leave usually disappear within the first 18 months. You seriously consider becoming one of them. The next morning, you return anyway. No promotion, no applause, just another line of patients outside the door. Chapter 3. The name on the door. By 29, your name is finally printed outside a small consultation room. After 5 years as a resident, you pass the attending physician examination. Your salary rises to about $1,400 a month, plus bonuses connected to patient volume and prescription value. You still see around 35 patients every morning. The difference is that nobody above you makes the final decision now. The prescription is yours, and so is the outcome. A 45-year-old woman arrives with insomnia that has lasted 11 months. Previous medications made her feel worse, and 2 earlier Chinese medicine formulas did not help. You take her pulse, review her records, and ask about her menstrual cycle, diet, work, and marriage. Then she mentions that her mother died 2 years earlier. None of her previous consultations had included that question. You document a pattern involving emotional strain and physical depletion, create a treatment plan, and remind her to continue appropriate medical follow-up. 3 weeks later, she returns and reports that she is sleeping longer. Then she begins crying in your office, not because you discovered a miracle herb, but because someone finally gave her enough time to explain what happened. That case changes the way you keep records. You begin carrying a private notebook separate from the official files, writing down details the hospital forms rarely capture. A factory worker with chronic back pain has not visited his daughter in 2 years because he cannot afford the trip. A retired teacher stops taking medication whenever she feels better because she is afraid of becoming dependent. A young father works night shifts and drinks 6 energy drinks a day, but never mentions it unless someone asks directly. These facts do not fit neatly inside diagnostic codes, but they change how people live with illness, and sometimes they change the treatment plan. By the end of the year, you have filled 4 notebooks. A visiting professor from your old university notices one on your desk and asks to read it. Then she tells you this is what clinical observation used to look like, before doctors became responsible for filling every empty field on a screen. She tells you to continue, quietly, the way your grandfather once did. Your patients begin requesting you by name. Some bring fruit, some bring hand-knitted scarves, and others bring red envelopes you are required to refuse. Some arrive with their entire extended families. If you helped one relative, they assume you can help everyone. You cannot see them all, so you stay 2 extra hours most evenings, unpaid. That winter, your girlfriend of 3 years leaves. She says she feels like she is dating a stethoscope with a heartbeat hidden somewhere inside it. You cannot completely disagree. The next morning, 38 patients are waiting. You return to work. Chapter 4. The quota you enforce. You are 35. After 6 years as an attending physician, you become Deputy Director of Chinese Internal Medicine. 12 younger doctors now report to you. Your annual compensation reaches about $24,400, including administrative allowances. You finally have your own office, and it even has a window, though it faces the hospital parking structure. You still see patients 3 mornings a week. The rest of your time belongs to management. You review case files, investigate complaints, assign beds, discuss insurance reimbursement, and attend meetings about increasing revenue per outpatient visit. That phrase never existed in your grandfather's clinic, but now you hear it almost every week. One resident keeps drawing your attention. Her name is Lynn. She is 24. She takes careful pulses and stays late without being asked. She reminds you of yourself before speed became a survival skill. Then the department's patient target increases. You watch her questions become shorter. Her
her notes become cleaner, and her attention become thinner. You want to protect her carefulness, but your signature appears beneath the new quota. That is the first time promotion feels less like climbing and more like becoming part of the machine above you. Around the same time, one of your long-term fatigue cases is discussed in a hospital report, and the patient's progress is later shared online. The attention brings more referrals, and soon people are searching your name before they enter the hospital. Your patient volume triples. You are no longer just another hospital doctor. You are becoming someone people travel to see. Your grandfather is 81 now, and his own health is failing. You visit him twice a year instead of every week. He tells you that a famous doctor and a good doctor are not always the same person. You say you understand. On the drive home, you realize you are no longer certain.
Chapter 5. The Price of Time. At 42, you become a chief physician, the highest clinical rank in the hospital system. It took years of publications, teaching evaluations, and a senior examination you passed on the second attempt. Apparently, important exams are something you prefer to complete twice. Including hospital bonuses, lecture fees, and consulting income, you earn close to $71,000 a year. Patients book your specialist clinic 3 to 6 months in advance. Appointment slots are sometimes traded for roughly 10 times the official fee. The hospital has tried to stop it, but the informal market appears to have a stronger long-term strategy. You lecture at medical conferences, publish papers few people outside the profession will ever read, supervise doctoral students, and write 2 books. One becomes popular among people interested in wellness rather than medicine. This annoys you more than it should. Your life is now divided between 3 worlds: the hospital, the lecture circuit, and a private clinic 2 afternoons a week. Hospital patients may wait 4 hours for 4 minutes with you. Private clients pay about $300 and receive 40 minutes and a cup of tea. They are not always sicker, they are simply able to purchase time. You tell yourself the medicine is identical in both rooms, but attention changes what you notice, and what you notice can change the treatment plan. Your 15-year-old son wants to study computer science. He has no interest in medicine. You do not push him, remembering too clearly what happens when a family decision becomes a child's destiny. Later, a national magazine profiles you. The photographer asks you to pose with antique acupuncture needles you have not used in 15 years, and you do it because the hospital's public relations office asked you to. The article calls you a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern science. Your grandfather reads it from a nursing facility. He calls you and says the headline is nonsense. There was never a bridge, he says, only one river that different people decided to rename. You laugh, then you think about it for the rest of the week. You begin reducing some private appointments. You are not completely sure what you are protecting, only that medicine should not become something available in full only to people who can afford more minutes. Chapter 6. The Funeral and the Budget. Your grandfather dies when you are 48. He is 91. You return to the county town and deliver the eulogy near the clinic where your training began. Standing beside the grave, you remember the boy who ground herbs until his hands blistered. Your phone vibrates during the burial. A pharmaceutical partner wants an answer before the end of the day. You do not check the message until that night. 3 years later, at 51, you are appointed deputy president of the hospital. You oversee Chinese medicine across 3 campuses and 400 staff members, with your annual compensation exceeding $162,000 through salary, board positions, and consulting roles. Most days, you approve budgets instead of writing prescriptions. You see patients 1 morning a week, usually complex cases referred by your own senior doctors. You also help decide which traditional formulas receive funding for clinical trials. To make the case, you speak the language of randomized trials, p-values, and evidence hierarchies. You travel to international conferences where audiences are polite, skeptical, and occasionally curious. Hospital leaders compare your department with cardiology and oncology, and you defend it using patient satisfaction, outpatient volume, and cost data. 2,000 years of accumulated observation does not fit neatly into a budget slide. You also hold consulting roles with companies developing standardized herbal extracts. The work may improve consistency, but it may also remove the very flexibility that made some formulas useful. Every decision solves one problem and creates another. Your wife asks whether you are happy with what the work has become. You tell her the work found you before you understood what happiness at work was supposed to mean. She says that is not an answer. This time, you do not pretend otherwise. Chapter 7. The System You Are Asked to Standardize. By 58, you lead Chinese internal medicine at a major university of Chinese medicine. You train chief physicians who will eventually train others, and your research group publishes in international journals that once ignored Chinese medicine research. 3 provincial research grants provide about $5.9 million for studies using modern pharmacology to examine traditional formulas. You value the research. You want stronger evidence, safer ingredients, and clearer standards. You also worry about what happens when every idea must be translated into a framework created somewhere else. Then a government commission asks you to help draft national practice standards. The goal is safety, consistency, and accountability. You support all three, but you also know your grandfather learned through decades of supervised observation, not through a checklist. You spend months debating what must be standardized and what should remain flexible. How long should training last? Which ingredients require tighter controls? Which diagnostic terms are too vague? How much variation can exist before a formula becomes something entirely different? You win some arguments and you lose others. Across your career, you have trained dozens of doctoral students. Some become chief physicians, and some enter research. One leaves medicine to create a supplement company selling ancient wisdom in brightly colored bottles. You feel a strange kind of grief about that student. You have never found the right name for it. Your own body has also begun to fail in small, ironic ways. Decades of leaning over patients and repeating the same pulse-taking motion have left you with chronic pain. Your own formulas help manage it, but they do not cure it. That imperfection humbles you more than any title. Later, you return to your grandfather's county to open a teaching clinic for 60 students. They receive salaries, insurance, supervision, and formal instruction. You are proud of that. Still, none of them will spend 3 silent years grinding herbs before speaking in a treatment room. That is probably progress. You simply cannot stop wondering what progress sometimes leaves behind. At the opening ceremony, you give a short speech. You do not mention your grandfather by name. You know your voice will not survive it. Chapter 8. The Letter in the Drawer. At 66, your name begins appearing on shortlists for National Chinese Medicine Master. You did not apply. Former students submitted decades of cases, publications, and testimonials on your behalf. The process makes your life feel like a competition you never agreed to enter. You still see patients twice a week, mostly referred by other senior physicians who have exhausted their usual options. Then, a young oncologist sends you a woman with late-stage pancreatic cancer. Nobody expects a cure. Her oncology and palliative care teams continue managing the disease. Your role is supportive. You review her symptoms: appetite, sleep, pain, and treatment side effects. Over 3 months, the plan changes as her body changes. You cannot save her. But after she dies, her daughter writes that some of the final weeks felt less frightening. You keep the letter in a drawer you rarely open. Later, state media interviews you about the future of Chinese medicine. The interviewer asks whether the tradition will disappear as younger doctors pursue surgical specialties and higher pay. You say it has survived wars, famines, political campaigns, and repeated attempts to redefine it. You do not say what you fear at night. You do not know whether it will survive another 50 years, or whether it will survive only as branding, stripped of the slow observation that once gave it meaning. Then your 20-year-old grandson begins spending weekends in your consultation room. Nobody pushed him. He simply arrives, sits in the corner, and watches, the way you once watched your grandfather. You are not sure whether that gives you hope or another responsibility. Chapter 9. The National Master. You are 74 when the announcement appears on state television. You are named a National Chinese Medicine Master. The title adds no salary. It adds responsibility. You are required to accept formal apprentices so your methods can be examined, challenged, and preserved. You accept 4. Your grandson is one of them, but he applies to the same process as everyone else. Tradition does not bend for family. You still see a small number of referred patients. Inside the consultation room, status becomes irrelevant. Careful pulse, careful questions, review the records. Refer back when another specialty is needed. You are later invited to speak in Geneva about traditional medicine and global health systems. Some people lean forward, and others check their phones. You no longer need everyone in the room to believe you. You need the discussion to remain honest about what is known, what remains uncertain, and what still requires evidence. Your wife of 44 years died 2 years earlier. You were involved in her care, but you could not become only her doctor. That was the hardest case of your life. You still keep her final prescription in your desk. It was never filled. You have never explained why. Then the government asks you to record your complete clinical methodology for a national digital archive. You sit beneath 3 studio lights while a camera records every movement of your hands. A research assistant asks you to explain how you recognize a pulse pattern in less than a minute. You begin with position, depth, rhythm, and strength. Then you stop. The checklist has boxes for symptoms, formulas, outcomes, and evidence. It has no box for the moment when a patient answers one question too quickly. No box for the smell of badly stored toward roots. No box for 40 years of being wrong before you learned what right sometimes feels like. Explaining your knowledge feels like describing the taste of your childhood kitchen to someone who has never eaten. The recording takes 11 months. At the end, the archive team says the material will be preserved for a century. You think about medicinal plants growers can no longer easily find, and you wonder whether preserved words will matter if the living ingredients disappear first. You do not say this to the camera. Some questions are too large for the archive trying to preserve them. Chapter 10. The Courtyard. You are 89. You no longer work at the hospital, and you no longer travel to conferences. Your name remains in textbooks you have not opened in years. You spend your mornings in a small courtyard near the county where your grandfather's clinic once stood. The old clinic is now a museum, and your family name appears on a plaque outside. You see only 3 or 4 patients a month. Most arrive through referral chains built over decades. Families who once trusted your grandfather now send their children to you. You do not advertise. You do not need to. You still remember formulas that appear in no published book. Some were taught to you once in the back room when you were 17. Some depend on plants that are becoming difficult to source responsibly. A few growers still maintain small plots, using methods passed down through their own families, and you have known some of them for 50 years. When they retire, you do not know what happens to the formulas that depend on them. In your 80s, you finally begin writing down what can be written, while marking what remains uncertain. Your grandson visits every Sunday. He is now a chief physician. He is married, and he has a 4-year-old daughter. She sits quietly in the courtyard while you review an old farmer's hospital records. The farmer's hands are too swollen to hold a teacup, and his hospital team has shifted the goal from cure to long-term symptom management. You take his pulse for nearly 10 minutes. There is no line outside anymore. You ask what he most wants to regain, and he says he wants to hold his own cup again. You discuss a supportive plan and tell his family to continue his hospital follow-ups. There is no promise of a miracle, only attention, uncertainty, and another careful attempt. The 4-year-old watches your hands. You do not know whether she will become a doctor, and you do not need her to. You only notice that she watches carefully. That is how your own education began. Somewhere else, in another small clinic, a 16-year-old places 3 fingers on a patient's wrist for the first time. The old doctor across the room says nothing. The student adjusts the pressure, then tries again. The chain does not continue because every old method is perfect. It continues because each generation is willing to observe, question, test, correct, and pass forward what remains useful. Your grandfather carried it for a while, then you did. Soon, someone else will. Not unchanged, not unquestioned, but still alive.